Welcome. And we're here for what, the 19th or 20th debate?
19th. I put in 20th. I didn't count actually. It could be the 19th.
19th is what this side says. Well, we're keeping track of them on the flyers, so that's how we know. Tonight will be a very interesting debate, and if it goes longer than we anticipate, we may have part 2 of the very same topic. We'll see how that goes. The debate will start with the backyard skeptics, represented by Bruce, Cary, and Bill. Please welcome them. And then the Christian Toastmaster Club is represented by David and David. So are you ready to put your thinking caps on and listen and learn? Awesome. Awesome. Let's get started. You're on.
So I'm going to show a small clip by Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry is a great debater, a good friend of Christopher Hitchens, who is one of the heavy-duty four horsemen atheists that died last year. So let's see if this thing works. I haven't done it before.
Ever since human beings have been capable of thought, we have asked big questions about how the world around us works. Some people have thought that there is another reality beyond the one we can perceive through our normal senses, a supernatural world, where there might be ghosts and goblins, gods and demons. They have thought that knowledge can come from this source, from supernatural revelations, prophetic visions, or divinely inspired books. Others have thought that the way to learn is by observing the world around us carefully and in detail, forming ideas about why things behave as they do, testing those ideas through experiments, refining them in the light of experience, then testing them again. Out of all the various methods that people have tried to use to find out how the world works, observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against evidence has the best track record. Prophets have predicted the end of the world on many occasions, but we are still here. Ancient holy books contain a description of the universe which has turned out to be totally inaccurate. If asked to choose between taking a medicine prescribed by a doctor whose methods are based on experiment and one who has selected medicine for you based on his visions, you will probably not choose the medicine from the vision. We may never know everything, but the testing of theories against evidence has proved itself again and again to be a reliable way to gain any knowledge about how the world around us works. Through science, we have cured deadly diseases, created amazing technologies, and learned things about the universe that fill us with wonder. When we want to know what's true and what is false, there is no better method.
That was Stephen Fry. He's part of the humanist, British humanist organization. I don't think we need my hotspot anymore, so I'm just going to go right into it. I'll introduce myself for the people who have not been here before, and I think that we have some newbies. Is that right? We have a lot of, how many people do we have new that has never been here before? Whoa, okay, that's good news. Okay, well, you'll be entertained because everyone else that is here has been here before, so that means it's good enough to watch again, I guess. And as I mentioned to a couple attendees that this is a very rare event. Please take this time off for my introduction here. Rare event because it isn't too often that atheists, skeptics, and believers come together and talk on a civil discourse and a open opportunity like this. We're going to have a Q&A later on, so if you have any questions, make sure to write them down in your head, write them down anywhere you like, maybe your iPhone notes or whatever. And I'm going to introduce myself first, and then when Bill and Cary start talking, before they talk, they're going to introduce themselves because we didn't bring up a bio for Debbie. That's how informal this is. So I started back here at Skeptics about 9 years ago, 8.5, 9 years ago, with 7 people. It's over 666 people now. Just kidding. No, it's over about 981 people. And we have 5 different chapters, so we have about 1,400 people, but there is some overlap. And it's the largest skeptics atheist group in Orange County. And surprisingly, there's a lot of secular groups in Orange County compared to LA, which I find fascinating because it's a more conservative area. Maybe it's because people naturally gravitate if they're a minority. Nino, can you just put me down? I hear just a little squeal on the speakers. So today's topic, how do we know what is real? Well, I can start and end with this. Best way to know what is real is to test your own beliefs. And to test your own beliefs is to find out the best arguments against your beliefs, whatever they might be. Socrates once said that the only thing I know is that I know nothing. And obviously he knew a lot about philosophy. But it's true because most of us know very little compared to the entire knowledge base of the world. There are actually very few things that we can know and call 100% true. But that depends on your definition of true, so I looked it up. It's honest, just, ideal, essential, consistent. I'm going to stick with that one. Legitimate, rightful, accurate. I'm going to stick with that one. And strict. And you have to, like, in this truest sense of the world, that's how strict would be approached there. So I think that we can all agree that truth means consistent or accurate. And we can talk about facts later. I'm sure that Dana-Bashian is going to possibly talk about that. I hope he will. So let's talk about our brain, because our brain is the big deciding factor here. It's always good to know that our brain works in non-perfect ways. Our memories can be all jumbled up. It's not like a computer code. In fact, they don't allow witnesses anymore that are eyewitness witnesses because their brains can jumble up the facts. And actually, there's quite a lot of science of this right down at University Irvine with Loftus, Miss Elizabeth Loftus. We know that our brains do a very bad job without any type of critical thinking skills to find out what's true. The neuroscientist Stephen Novell once described it as neural psychological humility, or knowing that your mind could be wrong. This, I believe, is the first step to critical thinking. Never assuming the truth of anything 100% confidence at first glance. In other words, humans are not good lie detectors. Our comfort level and confirmation bias is much more important and easier to accept than starting to question ourselves. Some believers are not even allowed to question their beliefs according to their dogma. This means that the truth for some believers is what they are told without any examination, no proofs needed. But let's separate out, this is the main topic I'm talking about, let's separate out the reason to believe that everything is natural versus supernatural. And this is where I'm going to be separating the natural and the supernatural. I think all of us can agree that in the natural world, there are true things. The one way to find out that is real in the natural world is a two-step process. One is to take a look at the science-based evidence, and 2 is to look at the process of finding out why the item in question is truer using our current knowledge base. The reason it might not be a good idea to use supernatural or religious-based reasonings for the natural world is because they are arbitrary. Just think of the thousands of reasons our ancestors explained rain, and all of those reasons are different. Now we've come a long way from rain, but there's a lot of different explanations for things in the supernatural world that conflict with many other religions and also many other sects. A very important thing that we should talk about is the confidence of the truth. For both the natural and supernatural laws, we use varying levels of confidence to decide what is more true or less true. It's very rarely that we listen to something and boom, it's 100% true. Much of our confidence is based on personal experience, we'll talk more about that, but can be swayed by others as we talk to them using our personal experiences as well. So it's difficult to say anything is true without signing a value of confidence. Do I know that the sun is going to come up tomorrow? I'm pretty sure it will. But let's say there is a big sun-sized spaceship from another place that comes by that's undetected, and swallows up our sun, and it's no longer there, and we float free in space. Of course, that probably is not going to happen, but I can't say absolutely 100%. What I can say is that I think compared to all the grains of sand in the world, there is one grain that the sun might not come up. Billions and billions to one. So I want to ask on creationists. I know Dave and Dave are creationists, young earth creationists. Do we have any other young earth creationists here? Okay. A message to the creationists then. A creationist once told me that science makes mistakes, and yes, it does. I would agree. But should we call it a mistake if the outcome is better after the mistake is shown? This is how science actually operates. When it is found that something is not true, we can reject it and look for other explanations, maybe in an entirely different area. In other words, mistakes lead to discoveries that are more true. We can find that out with medicine. We could find that out with many things. Microwave ovens. We could find that out with cigarettes. We know cigarettes are bad now based on science. So mistakes are good for all of us. If a creationist thinks that using a particular scientific method gives you a false result in one area, like geology, paleontology, radioelectric dating, that would be an interesting subject. Let's do some radioactive mating. Then, if you doubt those things that conflict with your religion, you have to doubt other scientific methods among all areas. Just imagine that if you doubted that. That way you'd have to throw away your cell phones. They might cause cancer. Don't travel in airplanes. You can't trust them. Stop your microwave oven. This is all scientifically based. If you do one thing, you have to accept that all these other things using the scientific method might be wrong as well. Why? All question and answer period. Differences in the natural and supernatural. The truth is less likely when authority figures disagree, and more likely when they do agree. And this is both with the natural and supernatural. This is true. Speaking of authority figures, we are trained from birth to respect and obey authority figures. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, policemen, and teachers all play a role in this hidden and ever-present but subconscious psychological condition. All of us want to listen to authority figures. It makes us feel much more comfortable. The term freethinker is defined as one that there is no authority figure except for oneself. Let's go back to confidence. Our confidence level is very high when it comes to airplane travel, medicine, auto safety, and even disinfecting hands from germ control, as we well know throughout the world. Hundreds of other examples from scientific fields gain our confidence as well. Our confidence level that these things are true is very close to 100%, like I mentioned earlier. Speaking of the supernatural believer, though, the confidence is usually at 100%, but the ideology and dogma differs from religion to religion. You ask a Muslim if he's 100% confident, you'll get that 100%. If this is the case, why should we trust any religion is true and should be used to guide our everyday life? If a believer states that there is only one true religion, as many do, how can we tell if it's true? How can we tell if any one of the 1,000 Christian sects are true? 44,000, all with a little different belief, especially in faith, grace, and good works. Any rational believer that states that over 1 billion people are wrong should question their opinion, because the other billion of people in another faith is saying exactly the same thing. Compared to science-based opinions, religious matters seem scattered and in contradiction with one another. If the scientific world, peer-reviewed studies are one step in finding out what's more true. Studies have to validate their sources, experiments, results, duplicate studies. What type of peer-reviewed study is there in the religious or supernatural field? There are none. None. Any preacher or minister can say whatever he likes and interpret any holy text he likes from any religion. There is no consensus of how to get to heaven through what I mentioned before, big three: good works, faith, or grace. There are 44,000 sects in just the Christianity alone, each one with a slightly different interpretation. If you go to one church, walk across the street, you'll find a different interpretation. The only exception for the one religious individual that does not know that there are many interpretations from any holy text he worships. And doesn't most believers fit this dilemma? Meaning that you don't know there are different interpretations because you accept your authority figure. Let's go into some supernatural proofs. I'm going to actually offset. We don't have an actual rebuttal here. We have a question and answer period. We have a short discussion that we'd like to include. Debbie, I forgot I didn't mention this. After our opening statements, we're going to talk with each other before we go into Q&A. Maybe that would be a good time after that to have the break. Dave here might, and I think that he has in the past, be mentioning the Bible. He is a Bible expert. He is a scholar. He is one of the best scholars I know. But when he talks about the Bible, listen carefully, because he's actually arguing against himself. The reason is because if you pick any holy text, you can argue that that holy text is correct. And I'm sure that Dave, if he was born in Egypt, might believe in some other religion than Christianity. What about personal experiences? He's going to argue, possibly personal experiences. Maybe some of you have proven your personal experience, have proven your faith to be true. It's actually an argument against yourself. If you look at other people in other religions, they have the same personal experiences. Who's to say what is true? You have to have at least a doubt that you could be wrong, unless your religion abolishes it, doesn't allow it. All these arguments can be made from another religion or in a different country. So what's the harm in believing the wrong idea or the right one? Did everybody hear what happened a couple days ago in Mina, the Islam faith? Did anybody happen to hear that? 700 people were trampled to death, and they were glad to be dead, because if you die throwing rocks at the pillars that Muhammad threw rocks at to scare the devil away, you have a highway to heaven. It demeans this life to believe in a religion, even if you think it's 100% true. The best way to know your own beliefs are true is to know the best arguments against your beliefs. I'm going to skip a little bit here. If Christianity or any other religion was 100% true, it would be easy to tell, because the answers to the hardest questions, problem of evil, for instance, is a big one in Christianity, would be so strong that there would be no question that Christianity was true. There would be no fallacies, no logical contradictions. Everything would be easily explained, and they would be very little to criticize. But that's not the case. Christianity, if true, would be so strong and solid that an 8th grader could defend it from the smartest atheist. But that's not the case. There is not one argument I've seen that can convince me it's even 10% true. There's a lot of good things in the Bible, but there's also a lot of good things in many, many other religions. I'm open to being converted that Christianity is true. I really am. If the evidence was there, if any religion was so true that all unabashed, educated atheists were joining it in droves, I would consider it. Religion, especially Christianity, can be extremely confusing on what sect you want to join. All of them have different demands on the Christian and different ways to get to heaven. They all have different doctrines and believe in things that other sects would consider only an apostate would do. Speaking in tongues, not dancing or drinking, not going to church. Just pick your own cafeteria. The best way to know that your own beliefs are true is to find the best arguments against your beliefs. Thank you. I'll have to introduce Cary. Cary is a good friend of mine. Would you like to introduce yourself, your own bio, real quick? You probably weren't prepared for that.
Oh, okay, sure.
There you go.
Do I do it like that? Okay.
That's right.
I'm not an atheist. I'm a non-scriptural monotheist, but I was welcomed at Backyard Skeptics, and I consider them very open-minded and thank them for it. I am a skeptic. I have no credential other than being a Bible school dropout. I have to get this organized in order to do my slide presentation, so I can't just
plug it in?
You just said you were going to give me the thing.
See, that's one thing I forgot to do after my presentation, too.
Okay, so we've got some dead time, folks.
Nino, take a mark on this, please. Time for While this gets up, does everybody know what a non-scriptural monotheist is? Kind of a new thing. Actually, it's Cary's thing. He believes in the supernatural, almighty, but not in any scripture. That's a monotheist, non-scriptural monotheist.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay. First, I admit that I cannot define knowledge. But if you think you can define it, then I at least know more about it than you do. A popular definition is justified true belief. But then what does justified mean? Properly grounded? What constitutes proper grounding? And how is that properly grounded? You just substitute one synonym for another and fall into either eternal regress or circularity. What we call knowledge may be nothing more than an illusion that facilitates the survival and procreation of those who believe it. Every legitimate declarative statement is either true or false. If you can identify which it is, you're more likely to survive. Once we accept logic as reliable for determining truth, we can claim to know a whole lot of things. But how do we know logic is reliable? We don't know it by logic because that's circular reasoning, which is a logical fallacy. We don't know it because it always works, because that's inductive reasoning, which is only good for determining probability. Just because something works doesn't mean your explanation of why it works is true, much less knowably true. If knowledge is what we think it is, rather than merely a life-supportive illusion, then it must be grounded in something transcendent to chemical events in brains. A personal supreme being would do the job. But I'm not going to say a personal supreme being is necessary because I can't prove it to the satisfaction of a large percentage of this audience. Now, that's as much as I can say without epistemic cop-out. But rather than shut up, I will now cop out and keep on talking just like the rest of the world. I claim to know what knowledge is. I claim to know stuff. Those are epistemic cop-outs, but I don't care. If I say there's a God, I can say he justifies my claim. If I say there's no God, I can still claim to know stuff because I flippin' want to. First, I claim to know I exist. Not because Descartes said so, but because I'm hardwired to know it. On the same level, oh, wait a minute, I got to do this now.
I was thinking about that.
Let's do it. Come on, sucker. Oh, there it is. Okay. Not because Descartes said so, but because I'm hardwired to know it. On the same level of knowledge, I claim to know that I think, perceive, and emote, that is, have emotions. Anytime I think, perceive, or emote, I know I'm doing it by hardwiring. On this level, chemical events in my brain are sufficient for knowledge because they just tell me which particular chemical event I'm experiencing. Second, I know logic is reliable, but not because I'm hardwired to. I know that because I'm programmed to know it. It didn't happen automatically. I had to learn it. But still, once I know it, it's part of my operating system. I can't possibly unknow it unless my system gets corrupted. There are no degrees of true knowledge. You either know something or you don't. But what we call knowledge has degrees and levels because what we call knowledge is really a bunch of different things. A statement is often said to be known by the impossibility of the contrary. That's wrong. Two contrary statements can both be false. A statement is known by the impossibility of the contradictory. That's the highest level of knowledge. It only applies to hardwired knowledge. Why doesn't it apply for logic and program knowledge? Now, I can't conceive of any universe in which logic is not reliable. But just because I can't conceive of something doesn't mean it's impossible. So, the second level of knowledge is inconceivability of the contradictory. Axioms are on this level. But we claim to know more stuff. What passes for knowledge is a hierarchy of certainty levels. I know the external world exists, and I'm not just a brain in a vat. I know it because if it were not true, it would make no difference to me. This is irrelevance of the contradictory, better known as Leibniz's difference that makes no difference. Next level, I know there's not a bulldozer in this room because if there were, I would see it. This is imperceivability of the contradictory. Knowledge that comes of first-hand interpretation of data is on this level. Next level, I know mermaids and centaurs don't exist because I've never perceived evidence to the contrary. And if there were such evidence, I surely would have seen it by now. This is ignorance of the contradictory. Next level, I know Bigfoot doesn't exist or Loch Ness Monster. I have seen evidence to the contrary, but I think it's crap. Conversely, I know the Holocaust happens. I have seen people who deny it, but I think they're full of crap. The strongest label I could put on this level of knowledge is improbability of the contradictory. All knowledge that comes from other people's testimony is on this level. All historical events that I have not personally witnessed, all scientific experiments that I have not personally performed. This is the sloppiest of levels. It contains a virtually infinite number of degrees of probability and no way to assign percentage numbers to most of them. This is the level that causes factual disagreements. It shouldn't even be called knowledge, but if we don't call it that, we can't compete in a world full of people who do. Despite our efforts, we are all epistemic cop-outs, but some to a much greater degree than others. There are real truth seekers, but there are many more truth-obstructing game players who call themselves truth seekers, and no hard line between them. The degree to which we refuse to admit our cop-outs is the degree to which we become the latter. Applause!
Just for the record, Bill's here for for natural support. Actually, he is one of the few biblical scholars that is an author that I know on our side, and he will be talking more in the discussion and the Q&A. How much time was that?
We used it 25.
Okay, so we have about 15 more minutes for the closing, right? Okay. You're up. You gonna go up there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I could stay here, doesn't
Just hurdle it.
Yeah. There you go. Here. Whoa. I lose some weight there, Dave.
Keep marking the red sea. Can you hear me?
No.
It'll probably fall on the floor or something.
Testing. All right. Well, how do we know what is true? Well, I used this argument before, but I want to refresh some people's minds, some people who weren't here before. You look around and you see the animals, the trees, the flowers, the sun, the moon, the stars, the people. You can know something about the Creator from the creation. He that formed the eye, does he not see? He that created the ear, does he not hear? We have a personality, therefore we'd expect the Creator to have a personality as well. The cause is usually greater than the effect. This is what we call natural revelation, the things of nature. We can know certain things. But for answers to questions like, who am I? Am I just an intelligent animal, or do I have a soul? What about life after death? How should I use my time and my talents? And what does God require from me? For answers to these kinds of questions, I need some kind of special revelation couched in human language that I can understand. And the question, where's this information found, and how can I be sure that it's from God? And I look throughout the gamut of literature available to us as humans, and I find only one book that passes the test required to be the Word of God, and that's the Bible. Now, the four tests I give are inspiration, inerrancy, preservation, and illumination. Inspiration comes from a Greek word, theopneustos. It literally means God breathed or God directed. It's like a master musician playing a piano. Each one of the keys on the piano has a different sound, just like each one of the apostles and prophets had a different personality, but God superintended the finished product so that it was without error. Of course, it would have to be without error, otherwise they'd need a red letter edition to tell me what's true and what isn't, what to teach my children if I had any, what to send my missionaries out with, and of course we don't have that. 3,408 times in the Bible, it claims to be the Word of God. Thus saith the Lord spoke, saying, you accepted these not as the words of man, but for what they really are, the Word of God. And then it makes a challenge to all the other religious writings in Isaiah 43:9 and 46:9. It says, I, the Lord, am one God. There's none else beside me, before me, that shall come after me, who's able to tell the end from the beginning. In other words, God, being outside the space-time mass continuum because he created it, would be able to see the end from the beginning. He's above the parade. We're looking through a picket fence. We see one float at a time. But God can see the end from the beginning. And so that's why we have 28.5% of the Old Testament and 21.5% of the New Testament is prophetic. And so we look at all the different prophecies concerning cities, towns, Tyre, Sidon, Memphis, Thebes, details concerning these cities. Peter Stoner wrote a book called Science Speaks, and he goes through these towns, these cities, and he shows the probability. He was the head of the math department at Westmont College, and he used the laws that he taught in class to basically decide what is the probability of each one of these things happen. It's an excellent book. But as he goes through, he tries to find out, well, okay, let's take one more, and he takes the person of Christ, the Messianic prophecies. He's got over 300 of those, and he says that's the same as taking, that's 10 to the 157th power. Basically, it's like taking just for 8 prophecies that Jesus would be born in Bethlehem, Micah 5:2, that he'd be sold for 30 pieces of silver, that silver would be used to buy a potter's field and cast onto the temple floor, that he'd be crucified, that he'd be crucified between 2 thieves. All these things are detailed prophecies in the Old Testament, and these were written over, well, we know that the Old Testament was, the Septuagint was translated in 250 BC. We know that these things were prophesied, many of them over 1,000 years before Jesus came. And so he said the probability of just 8 of those things happening in life is any one person, the same as taking a silver dollar, spreading them over the state of Texas 2 feet high, marking one, mixing them up, and have a blindfolded guy pick the right one the first time. And like I say, I've said this before, but I think it's good to know that the prophecies are there. And so he goes in and gives 48 prophecies. He says that's the same as taking electrons, cramming them one up against another. It would take you 19 million years to count a line 1 inch long at the rate of 250 a minute. So to count a cubic inch, it would take you 19 million years times 19 million years times 19 million years just to count them. Start at the center of the Earth, go 6 billion light years in radius, create these balls of electrons, 6 billion light years in radius at the rate of 500 a minute for 6 billion years, and it'd be 10 to the 10th times that. Mix them up and have a blindfolded guy pick the right one the first time. And that's the credentials that God gave his son so that we would be without excuse to recognize him when he came. There's no prophecies concerning Muhammad before he came, no prophecies concerning Buddha before he came, no prophecies concerning Joseph Smith, Charles Taze Russell, or the founder of any other cult or world religion before he came. Christianity is unique. Now we have a lot of things in the Old Testament. The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament declares his handiwork. His invisible power and attributes are clearly seen by the things that are made, so that they are without excuse. Mark 4:12 says that seeing they may not see, and perceive, hearing they may not hear, lest they understand with their hearts and be converted. Understanding with your heart is sometimes a gift of God. God gives wisdom to the upright. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. To those that are pleasing in his sight, he gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. That's a gift of God. I would say these atheists here are probably very intelligent people, no question about it. But sometimes we have to look for, God gives wisdom to the upright. He gives insight when he answers certain prayers. We had I think Deborah did a great job when we had a topic on prayer. And I was studying that, and I always learn probably a lot from these guys because, they bring up some good objections. But I was thinking about what kind of prayer does God actually answer? And there are certain prayers that God will always answer yes. And one of those prayers is, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. He gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not. James 1. And so God does answer prayers, and when I know that he answers certain prayers yes, it's an encouragement for me to pray. So I learned that at this atheist debate. I thought, there's so many things. I talked to Richard Carrier. I said, we were talking after the debate. I said I do a whole lot of better job preparing for the debate after the debate than I do before, and Richard kind of laughed and said, so do I. What I'd like to do is look at some of the things that the Bible says that there's no way that the writers of the Bible would know. For example, we see that the earth free floats in space, Job 26:7, affected only by gravity, while other sources declare the earth sat in the back of an elephant or turtle, back of a fish, the Muslim fish, the noon on top of back of a, which is on top of the bull, which is on top of a cube, which is on top of dust, and only Allah knows what's under the dust. But the Bible doesn't give any of those fanciful things. The Bible states perfect dimensions for a stable floating vessel, the ark, 6 times longer than it is wide. sanitation industry was birthed in Deuteronomy 23:12. Some 3,500 years ago, God commanded his people to leave a place outside the camp where they could relieve themselves. They were to carry a shovel so they could dig a hole or latrine and bury the waste. Before World War I, more people died because they didn't know how to deal with their waste than they did in the battles themselves. Oceans contain springs. There's no way you would know that. Job 38:16, the ocean is very deep. Almost all the ocean floor is in total darkness and pressure is enormous. It had been impossible for Job to have explored the springs of the sea. Until recently, it was thought that the oceans were filled only by rivers and springs and rain. Yet in 1970s, there was, with the help of deep diving research, submarines were constructed that could withstand 6,000 pounds of square inch pressure. And oceanographers discovered the springs of the ocean floors. Our bodies are made from the dust of the ground. Scientists have discovered that the human body is comprised of some 28 base and trace elements, all of which are found in the earth. That's Genesis 2:7. The earth is a sphere. Actually, it's called a chug. It says, and back then, this is Isaiah 40:22. At that time, when many thought the earth was flat, the Bible told us that the earth is spherical. Scriptures assumes a revolving spherical earth. Luke 17:34, Jesus said at the time of his return, some would be eating, some would be sleeping in bed, others would be in the field. So day and night would be happening at the same time. Obviously, the earth is spinning, and that does occur. The Bible compares the number of stars with the sands in the sea. And of course, Genesis 22:17, Hebrews 11:12. Amazingly, gross estimates of the number of sand grains are comparable to the estimated numbers of stars in the universe, 100 billion stars in each of 100 billion galaxies. The origin of major language groups is explained. If everybody came from the same person or place, you would expect they'd all speak the same language, but the Bible gives a description of why we have so many various languages at the Tower of Babel. And of course, the Bible, the origin of it tells us to avoid swine, for example, in Deuteronomy 14:8. Not long ago, science learned that eating undercooked pork causes infection of parasites, trichinosis. Now consider, the Bible forbid eating the swine more than 3,000 years before we learned how to cook pork safely. Incest laws established in Leviticus. To marry near kin in the ancient world was common, yet beginning about 1500 BC, God forbid this practice. The genetic load had reached a certain level so that people, if they did marry, the gene pool was sufficiently weak so that it could cause defects to occur in the offspring. So circumcision on the 8th day is ideal. That's given in Genesis 17:12, Leviticus 12:3. Medical science discovered that the blood clotting chemical peaks at the newborn on the 8th day. This is the safest day to circumcise the baby. Medical quarantine was instituted in Leviticus 13 and Numbers 5. And of course, long before man understood the principles of quarantine, this is how they broke the Black Plague in Europe. It's like somebody went back to the Old Testament and said, what did they do there? And that was one of the ways they discovered. A guy named Dr. Macmillan wrote a book called None of These Diseases. And he went through and saw how the doctors would go to visit the dead, and then they would visit the infirmary for the babies. And they found that the babies were dying at a very high rate, and they found out that when the Bible says that they had to wash ceremonially after they handled the dead, that this was something that they had not anticipated. Each star is unique. In the Bible, centuries before the advent of the telescope, the Bible declared that what only God and the angels knew, that each star varies in size and intensity. And this is one I like. Cavemen are described in the Bible in Job 30:1-8. 4,000 years ago, Job describes certain vile men who were driven from society to forage among the bushes and survival, and who live in the clefts of the valleys and the caves of the earth and the rocks. Therefore, cavemen were simply outcasts and vagabonds, not our primitive ancestors necessarily. Safe drinking water, God forbid, drinking from vessels or stagnant water that had been contaminated or come in contact with a dead animal. This is one of the things that Muhammad's disciples asked him. There was a dead donkey, and he said nothing can pollute the water, but we know that's not true. In the last 100 years, medical science has learned that contaminated water can cause typhoid and cholera. And pest control. Farmers have been plagued today with insects, yet God gave a surefire remedy for controlling pests centuries ago. Just let the land rest every 7th year. And what that does, insects in the winter place they're offspring in the stalks of last year's harvest, and they hatch in the spring and are perpetuated by laying eggs in the new crop. If the crop is denied 1 year out of 7, the pests have nothing to subsist upon and are thereby controlled. So there's a lot of more, but scientists confirms the Bible, and that's one interesting thing. Henry Morris wrote a book called The Bible and Modern Science. The whole book basically is showing that there is nothing in the Bible that contradicts modern science. I'd like to mention just a little bit, postmodernism is something that I thought would be appropriate in this particular setting. When I was at Oxford, I had a study all night sometimes in the study hall, and there was a guy who was a postmodern studying in the next room, and so when I get bored, I'd go over and argue with him for a while, and it's kind of like nailing Jello to the wall, because he didn't believe in truth, you know. So how can you argue with somebody that doesn't believe there is such a thing as truth? But religious pluralism is the belief that one must tolerate all religions' beliefs because no religion can be true. It kind of sounds like what Bruce was saying. Postmoderns believe in skepticism of absolute truth. Skepticism is discernment, a foundation of knowledge. In other words, they don't really believe what's true for you might not be true for me. And so this is existentialism, actually. The problem with existentialism is everybody makes up their own truth, and therefore that doesn't make good for a society if everybody makes up their own laws. So postmodernism says, well, each community, each group, each city, whatever, will make up their own laws. But what is true for them is most likely what is convenient. And so you may, you know, for Richard Rorty, truth is whatever his community of scholars allows him to get away with. If Rorty says the moon is made of green cheese and his community doesn't disagree with him, then for him the moon is made of green cheese. Reality is not what objectively exists in postmodernism. Reality is produced by our agreement of what it is. We do not discover true facts, we create them. That the rejection of truth lies in the center of postmodernity must be grasped in order to understand it, any kind of handle on what's being taught. As with existentialism, there's a rejection of absolute truth. But existentialism, truth is not found, it's created, but unlike existentialism, truth is constructed not individually but socially. However, the prevalent answers to the truth question in Western society today are rooted in one of 3 sources: the Scripture, Enlightenment, or postmodernism. What we've heard so far is the Enlightenment. In other words, man left to his own devices is able to discover truth. Well, I think that's true in many cases. But I think there are certain things that we don't have any knowledge of. We don't know things because nobody was there. Nobody actually was able to perceive the depths of knowledge and who God is. If we haven't been able to see him, how do we know who he is? So the Enlightenment placed faith on rationalism, which taught that truth is knowable by unaided intellect of the sincere truth seeker. Revelation is not needed. Reason and science could produce all the answers. It was under the influence of the Enlightenment that some of the framers of the Declaration of Independence would say, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Truth, not revealed by God, but self-evident is to the reasoning mind, was the hallmark of the Enlightenment. Rationalism of Enlightenment, as Lane Miller tells us, is the use of the mind which trusts in its own ability to arrive at truth about God without his aid, apart from any revelation. It treats the mind as the source rather than a channel. Okay. To be continued.
Before we continue, Debbie, would you like to give, before the Q&A, would you like to give instructions on the Q&A?
Well, he's got to go first.
Correct, before the Q&A. Right.
He's got 5 minutes.
Correct.
Okay.
Crashed. Get a mic. Use the mic. Use the mic.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to say I'm thanking the participants on both sides of me because I get to play the 4th position, otherwise known as cleanup. And we'll find out whether I succeed in that endeavor.
I want to hold this closer to you.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
please.
Is that okay? Okay, can you hear me? Hello? There we go, okay. I'm playing cleanup. We'll find out if it works. The main objectives I'm going to have are to describe some popular notions regarding the matter of truth and to display some approaches that we might be familiar with and some limitations. Also, to mention some statistical considerations and then to give some concluding observations. Now, for this next clip, it's going to be just short, and I hope the volume will be okay. We'll find out.
I have great respect for psychiatry and great contempt for meddling amateurs who go around practicing it.
As you might recognize from Miracle on 34th Street, I'm going to replace the word psychiatry by science. I have great respect for science, great contempt for meddling amateurs. So I want to make my position clear from the outset. I've been in the sciences all my life, and I'm not about to start casting them aside now. Here's another one. This is a familiar quotation that you might recognize from The Blind Man and the Elephant, about each was partly in the right and all were in the wrong. Now let me say something about the mathematical approach. There are at least two ways of characterizing it. May we say exact is either truth is on-off like a binary switch, or, for example, if you're trying to identify something in a chemical laboratory as the great unknown, it will either match the entity or it won't. That's one side. The other side is that truth could be estimated by measurements. Thus, we might be able to converge in on it, depending upon whether or not our measurements are in fact reconcilable with the truth. By the way, the truth is generally not known in any event. I'll get to that in a moment. Here are some basic limitations in mathematics. These you might not be familiar with if you haven't seen them before, but they were proven in the 1930s and 1950s. Mathematical truth is undefinable. Mathematical truth is undecidable. And there's a couple of things under there, the continuum hypothesis and possibly measure problem. And there's no complete consistent mathematics. Now, when I mentioned this matter 20 months and 10 days ago, our friends on the other side said, I asked them if it gave them any heartburn because they denied that there was transcendent thought. The response I got back is, well, then we win. And I said, no, you don't. And I had to explain afterward, the reason why is that you need transcendent thought just to comprehend the problems that I mentioned even exist. Otherwise, you never would. From the empirical approach, let me give some kudos to the other side because in a certain sense they covered the topics. I'm just going to cast them into a more compact form. There are four philosophical schools of thought according to one paradigm, and each one of these four philosophical schools of thought has its place. Now, when I say absolutism, I'm speaking about knowing something. I'll symbolize that by K. Empiricism by T, testing. Pragmatism by W for works. And existentialism, B for BE. KTWB. Doesn't sound like a radio station, but in absolutism, we might be speaking about where somebody else knows something that we don't particularly happen to know. If you're in grade school, you come to your teachers or your parents because they know and you don't. If you happen to believe in a supernatural being, then you would go to the supernatural being in order to find out things that you could never discover yourself. If you're a scientist, you might be relying upon the consensus of opinion about other scientists and what they have to say, whereas, in fact, if you don't have any means of testing these things yourself, this is also a form of absolutism. Now, absolutism can take many, many forms. Some of them are hard to detect. Empiricism is to say that we are testing things. However, there are limits to that, as I'll go into a moment. Pragmatism is to say, if I turn on a switch, if it and the machine turns on, well, that's enough for me. In other words, it works. Existentialism is, it just has to exist. This would be more or less an Eastern thought. Now, I would prefer empiricism when it comes to scientific matters. That doesn't mean the others don't have their place. They do. But we have to be careful about which one of them we apply. And the problem that often exists is that we'll have two or more of these being used at the same time in order to justify a particular position. And that I'll explain in a moment. Diverging for one moment on empiricism, this is dispassionate interchange. You might recognize these as being mostly the scientific method, and it's already been stated that we don't have 0 or 100% probability, and of course I agree with that in empiricism. There are also non-empirical categories. They have validity, they just don't have a validity within empiricism, but they're still real. For example, if I give you a history book, you wouldn't be able to repeat the past. You would be relying upon the people whose information constructed that history book. The spiritual, well, that's something that we on this side of the table would hold to, but it would be also non-empirical. And the unsensed, the things that have never gone under the microscope or under the microphone. Now, I'd like to apply some of this to a comparison of two versions of the same statement that I've seen on your own site. The first is the one that I saw 15 months and a week ago when I last was presenting. We need empirical evidence of any claim to accept it as true. Yes, and I said I agree with that statement, and I still do. Not to be an evidentialist, but I agree with the statement. Now, however, the newer version says we need empirical evidence and scientific consensus of any claim to accept it as true. Here's where the problem is. When we say and scientific consensus, we are now borrowing upon the back of absolutism while trying to justify at the same time with empiricism. This is what we call eclecticism, trying to use two or more philosophies at the same time to justify something. In other words, it's an inconsistent philosophy. And that's where I have the problem in that case. Here are some statistical considerations in case you happen to be an engineer or the like. I want to drop down to the bottom and discuss accuracy and precision because accuracy was described. Accuracy is how close measurements are to the actual truth. Precision is how close measurements are to each other. The only thing we really have is precision. We don't have accuracy per se, unless, of course, there is somebody to tell us what the truth actually is. We can simulate things that are the truth. It's called a Monte Carlo simulation. But actual truth cannot be discovered by us. We can only perhaps approximate and believe our precision is going to be in that direction. Here are some others that the great statisticians out there might have a feel for. These are the nuts and bolts of how we try to characterize things. Also further, what do we do with the statistics once we have them? There are errors in them. They could be determinate or indeterminate. There could be biases. There could be other kinds of sources. And there's also the matter of computation, which was more a problem in the days when I took school when there were only so many significant digits available, but really the problem is still there after all. And then finally, to communicate these results, we need to have senders and receivers tuned to each other with a medium that promotes rather than interferes. And there are means of measuring these, autocorrelation and ambiguity functions. And then there's the uncertainty principle as well. Those who would hold to the Heisenberg view of things would say that position and momentum cannot be measured accurately at the same time. When one tries to measure one, he'll be giving up accuracy in the other, or if you like, precision in the other. I have some concluding observations for this few minutes. Extrapolation is similar to interpolation, but it's fraught with mischief, much more so than interpolation. In other words, especially back into the unobservable, unrepeatable past. Finally, verified scientific laws don't replace other verified scientific laws. We have to characterize what we mean by that. And as we would say, the translation is the new science better agree with the old science. Here's some list of references, and I'm through.
I think, Debbie, should I announce it, or you announce what we're going to do next?
Go ahead.
Okay. We're going to have discussion time. And I'm going to let Bill have the first whack. Oh, we're going to have to scoot this around, too.
Well, good evening, everyone. And first of all, I want to thank my fellow participants. I'm a little bit of a free rider here since I didn't make a statement. but I have great respect for everyone up here in front of the room. This is a very difficult subject, it seems to me, so I have great respect for everybody who's participating. Dave talked about, I just have to start out with this, Dave talked about accuracy and precision.
I have to say which Dave in each case.
Dave DB. Dave DB. Accuracy and precision. Reminds me of a story. Guy goes to the Natural History Museum and he's checking out the old dinosaur bones, and he sees this really impressive skeleton. And he says to the docent, "Well, how old are these dinosaur bones?" And the docent says, "Well, they're 60 million and 3 years and 6 months old." And the guy says, "Holy cow, that's really precise. How do you know it's exactly they're exactly that old?" And the guy says, "Well, when I started working here, they were told me they were 60 million years old, and that was 3.5 years ago." I guess I want to start with sort of a question that kind of goes to the heart of Revelation. Dave L. made reference to various scientific tidbits we can find in the scriptures. And there was also reference, I believe, to the fact that in some cases we can't verify things because we can't go back in time. In the prologue of the fourth gospel, it states that the Word was present at the creation. Of course, the fourth gospel was written by or it's presumed to be written by John, a human being. And I guess my question to the other side, and this is really, it has sort of broader applicability, but how would the author of John have known any of that, since he or none of us were there at the creation?
Well, God spoke through these men. The Holy Spirit moved them, and this is God's communicating with them, through them. There was a question of how we know a true apostle from a false apostle, and this was given in 2 Corinthians 12:12. The signs of the apostle are these: signs, wonders, miracles. God could do the miracle. He wouldn't have to use some human instrument to do the miracle, but he used human instruments to authenticate their written and spoken word. So when God, if we didn't believe not me, believe the works that I do. And so these were the ways in which God demonstrated a true apostle from a false apostle. So Jesus was with John for a number of years. He spoke a lot to him, and we don't know all of what Jesus spoke directly to John, but we also know that the Holy Spirit communicated a message to him. These men wrote, the Holy Spirit moved, and we call this inspiration.
Furthermore, I'd like to mention that since the issue of scientists came up also, none of the things that were in the Bible particularly gave the founders of modern science any heartburn. And we can name those scientists readily at this point. And more or less they considered those things to be so. And I'd also like to say, for those who like to bring up the Galileo canard, we might remark that Galileo was Catholic and he was within the Catholic Church, and also his experience was close to unique. Most of the frack that ever took place among scientists was among themselves and not between themselves and the church. Thomas Hook comes to mind as being one of the more difficult people to deal with back then. But in general, this was not where there was somebody on high saying that somebody had to believe this way. Rather, they did so of their own accord, and they were more or less given relative freedom to do so.
Just a quick follow-up on, I was hoping that Dave L. could help me distinguish between communication that the likes of the author of the Gospel of John and Paul received from the Christian God on the one hand, say, and the revelation that Muhammad received from Allah. According to the Hadith, Muhammad performed miracles. He split the moon in two at one point, and at another point he issued water from his fingers so that his followers could drink and bathe before prayers. So how do you distinguish those two situations?
None of those miracles are listed in the Quran. That's why when they were looking around for a miracle, because they were trying to bring Muhammad up to the level of Jesus, and Jesus had all these recorded miracles, Muhammad had no miracles in the Quran itself. So these were added later in some of the hadiths, Ibn Ishaq, Ali Muslim, al-Bukhari, Tabari, some of the more of the what we call the Sunnah. But really, we have no record of him. In fact, that's the reason that the only miracle that they could ascribe to Muhammad was the writing of the Quran. And that's why when I start talking about what does the Quran actually teach, that there's 7 earths flat like a carpet separated by 500 walking years sitting on top of this large fish, and above the 7th earth are 8 giant goats with 500 years between their front hooves and their back hooves. Shooting stars are missiles God throws at demons to keep them out of heaven, and the sun sets in a murky pool surrounded by a bunch of people. I mean, this is the only evidence, the scientific reliability of the Quran is the only evidence that they have to support that Muhammad is a true prophet and Allah is the true God.
Okay, of course, the Gospels were written after the life of Jesus, just as the Hadith was written after the life of Muhammad, yes?
Yes, the Gospels were written by people who were with Jesus, so the people around them were also alive as well. And they could refute anything that that the apostles had said.
I think you're in a minority about that, Dave. I know that this is going to get into God, Bible, and the Jesus, but we're still talking about truths. And one of the things I look at is the consensus of biblical scholars. And most biblical scholars are not the young earth variety that you are. That's neither bad nor good, except that you take a look at the fact of consensus of biblical scholars think that the Bible was written not by the actual apostles, but by the 30 to 40 years after Jesus has died. Now, if you don't agree with the consensus, that's fine. But you don't agree. I mean, you have to admit that. It says, my minority opinion is this, and that is fine. I like your opinion, would like your opinion, but I think most of the biblical scholars are in disagreement with you.
No, I would agree with that they were written 20, 30, 40 years after Jesus died.
Okay, very good.
Yes, that's not the question.
I thought you misworded that a little bit different.
But what I'm saying is that if they were alive, then obviously people who were living at the same time as Jesus, since they spent time with Jesus, would also be alive.
Well, what about the question of science? In the Bible it says, again, I want to, this is probably my last question before we take a little break. It says that the bat is a bird in the Bible. Among the 2,500 other contradictions in the Bible, how do you get around that?
The bat is
a bird,
uniquely designed.
Not a mammal. It is a mammal. If everybody has a question about that, a bat is a mammal.
There is a language of appearance. We say that the sun rises and the sun sets. We talk about shooting stars. They're not really stars. And we talk about things as they appear many times. And there's a lot of that kind of language in the Bible, language of appearance.
I'll accept that. I'll accept that explanation from him.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. And then when we return, we're going to do the question and answer. There is a fairness factor in this debate. You heard the backyard skeptics ask a question of the Christian side. Now it will be time for the Christians to ask a questions of the backyard skeptics, and then we'll go into question and answer. All right, David?
Sorry, for these guys to ask a question? Oh, so we're continuing the discussion that we had before?
Just briefly, yes, because you asked the question, you didn't let it come back.
What's your time limit on this?
The last one was 4 minutes. It won't go any more than 4 minutes.
Okay.
Start swinging.
Right. In the initial discussion from Stephen Fry, most of the discussion that he had was on empiricism, and then at the tail end, he promoted humanism. I don't see how those two would necessarily agree with each other. Would you care to give a definition of each and how they would compare with each other to help us better understand Mr. Fry?
I think I got that one. Empiricism means that we believe in the scientific method is the best way to describe the observations that we see in the world. That's it. nothing more. We use hypothesis, testing, retesting, proving, and eventually we come with a consensus. Humanism actually accepts that because that's the only way to improve society, improve the world, improve our human condition. That word, that phrase, human condition, is what the humanists say that they live for. They want to improve the human condition of their family, their city, their county, their country, and the world. That's why you see more of a liberal bent of a free thinker with humanism. Humanism is a religion, but it doesn't worship. In fact, there used to be a religious humanism. That's actually how it started. But today's humanism is pretty much secular. Secular meaning we want to live the best we can in this world because there might not be an afterlife. Some people simply don't believe there's an afterlife, I'll put it that way. Does that explain the difference? There's actually, empiricism is science-based, and humanism believes the only way we can improve the human condition is through science. How's that?
Well, then would you say that empiricism implies humanism?
No, because you can be a non-humanist and still totally accept empiricism. In fact, you can probably, you can't do it as a young Earth creationist, but possibly an old Earth creationist, you can accept empiricism.
I'd say you could be an empiricist without being a humanist, too. That's what I am.
Probably.
Okay.
Well, you're very knowledgeable about science, and that's why I like you, Dave.
Okay, I'm going to ask all three of you. Anybody can field this one. I'm going to ask the same question I asked Stephen Jay Gould in front of 4,000 people. Where did the substance of the universe come from? Where did life come from? And how did we get increase in specificity, increase in complexity? Three different questions.
Okay, here we go again. Don't want to hog the mic here. One thing that skeptics and humanists and atheists are proud of to our core is that it's okay to say we don't know. We don't know. We don't know any of those things. But I suspect that in the future, scientists will put these chemicals together in some petri dish and out will pop a cell. One cell. No nucleus. That's how they started. No nucleus, just a cell. Do you think it's not going to happen? It will happen eventually. 1,000, 5,000 years, it will happen. And by that time, we might even have a better idea on how the universe happened. We have a model, scientifically, of how the universe started at Planck time. Planck time is 10 to the minus 43rd second. That's 0.43 zeros and a 1. We have a model after that. We don't know what happened before that. It's called inflation. It defies the laws of physics as we know it. Maybe we have to find out a new set of laws to fix it. We're changing laws of physics. Remember those little mistakes I talked about before? Newton wasn't wrong. He was just wrong about the very small and the very large. Everything else in between he was right on. So we're adding to that science. Someday we might find out, but we'll never know of another multiverse. We don't know if there's another, there's another universe. We don't know about it. The idea there is that if it happened one time, it could happen at other times in other places. And it may be different dimensions. Is that good enough?
Well, then, can you hear me there? Okay. Well, then, Bruce, I would ask, are you not expressing a belief instead of merely relying upon empiricism? Where is your evidence to support your belief rather than just expressing some sort of progressivism that says we have an optimistic view of what things are going to be like?
Bill? Okay. I can't say I have a belief in something I don't know. How can anyone? If you don't know something, how can you have a belief in it? So I can't answer that question. Good questions, though. Thanks, Dave.
But you have faith that it's going to happen. That's a belief.
The arc of science is unpredictable. It can't happen.
You have more faith than I do, Bruce.
It will happen. I don't like the word faith because faith implies a religious tone. I like confidence, because confidence determines, there's that level of confidence, between 0 and 100, let's say. And I have confidence that science will make this a better world. Some people are anti-science. Young Earth creationists deny science in certain areas. There's a lot of people that are in one particular party that don't like science. Climate change, for instance, is an example. We know where that's going, and I think the tide is changing on that one. Does anyone want to talk politics here?
Could I?
No. Let's not.
Could I respond to a question that was given just a while ago that was asked me?
Very briefly.
Okay. It was the problem about the bat. In Leviticus 11:13, it talks, and these are they which shall be an abomination among the fowls. In other words, the birds, these are these scavenger birds, they're not supposed to eat. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the ostrich, the osprey, and the vulture, the kite after his kind, the raven after his kind, the owl, the night hawk, the cuckoo, and the hawk after his kind, and the little owl, and the cormorant, and the great owl, and the swan, and the pelican. Basically, all he's doing here, he's not talking about them being necessarily birds. They're just fowls. They're just things that fly in the air. So that's what I said, language of appearance.
Okay, are you ready with your questions?
It's in a different verse. Oh, it is at the end? The last word?
It's a long list.
A long list. Okay, I didn't get the bat in there. Sorry. Let's go.
Well, who's got our first question of the night? Please, come on.
I'd like to place one stipulation. You can have one short rebuttal. So stay at the mic if you want to have a short rebuttal, but only one, please.
It's a follow-up to what they asked for the skeptics. How do you think life originated? I didn't ask you if you knew. I hear skeptics all the time say, we don't know. The law of biogenesis, the cell theory, and everything observed teaches life only comes from life. So I'm not asking you if you know, but what is your best explanation for the origin of life? And is your explanation based upon science or your paradigm in philosophy?
I disagree that life comes from life. That's what? That doesn't make any sense at all. I don't think that does. I think that life comes, for me and a lot of other scientists, which I'm not one of, life is the first RNA replicating molecule. Anything that replicates. Now, you're talking about a life without a purpose. You're talking about straight chemicals and amino acids, which, by the way, is in nearly every comet and asteroid that we see coming our way. So I don't agree with your statement that life comes from life. If you want to believe God did it, that's fine. There's no harm done. And someday we'll find out. Look up the Miller experiments in the 50s.
Oh, I know it.
Okay, very good. And there are some discrepancies between that. It was a raw science experiment, I totally admit. And the thing is, they did go back 44 years later, and they determined that instead of 13 amino acids, there were about 2 or 3 times more. So there was a lot of chemicals that they didn't know at the time, simply from combining electricity and the same type of environment. Supposedly that was about 2 to 3 billion years ago.
Okay, well, you didn't answer my question. I didn't ask how they originated or how they made amino acids. I asked how they made the origin of life, and I didn't see any scientific explanation. I heard you talk about RNA replication.
I answered it as we don't know.
I didn't ask if you knew your best explanation.
I did give you the best explanation.
Which was one?
Well, RNA started replicating itself, and it went from there. And if you have to think, anyway,
That's life.
Remember the Earth was bubbling, and there must have been trillions of trillions of trillions of these reactions happening. In fact, a lot of scientists think that life happened many, many times, possibly 1 million or more times. The first cell was created and then completely got destroyed. And it was only when the first cell was created that had enough, well, survival of the fittest is one way to put it, but it's scientifically described a little differly. Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay.
You're thinking natural
We'll have
process.
to talk
Okay.
later then. Thanks.
Okay.
Good question, though.
Okay, you're welcome.
However, I'd like to respond, though. I'd like to respond. In one of my slides, in my presentation, I say that RNA is not proven to do all the work. And that's only a hypothesis at this point. In fact, I would say anybody who's actually would actually show such a thing would be an automatic candidate, nay, a winner of the Nobel Prize in either math or, in either physics and or chemistry.
To the podium. Benito, if you want to go, you don't have to raise your hand. Everybody? Don't have to raise your hand.
I have 5, but very short questions, I guarantee.
2 out of 5, Benito. Please.
5 very short, answerable with yes or no, okay? For the Christian side. Number 1, does life exist?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Number 2, is life self-created?
No.
Yes.
Okay. Number 3, is God self-created?
No, he always existed.
Created by man, yes.
Is what always existed?
Well,
Is God self-created?
Oh, God?
yes,
Okay.
God. Is he
Self-existent. That's
Well, I take the answer that God has always existed as affirmative. God is self-created. He has always no. Then we have a conflict of meaning of
He
what we
wasn't
understand
created,
by.
he always existed.
I interpret them as being the same.
God is out this side of
self-created.
the space-time mass continuum by the very definition, so he doesn't need a creation.
Okay, so the answer is no. Yes or no?
That's what I said.
No. Okay, no. Number 4, why must God be self-created or eternally existing, whichever way? Why must God be that way?
From a pragmatic view, if he didn't exist, nothing else would.
Okay. And last, why can't God be exactly equal to life? That's it.
He is greater than his creation, which includes life and a whole lot of things that aren't living.
So, in your opinion, God is not equal to life, but is greater than life.
God created everything that was, and it says, without him was not anything made that was made.
Hey guys, thanks for all you're doing here. I need to ask for a clarification from Dave L. and then a question, if you don't mind. I'm not sure if I heard you properly, so I'm asking you to clarify. I think you said that all knowledge comes from revelation. Is that correct? Early on?
It was prayer.
Or were you just...
I'm saying certain special knowledge that we wouldn't have any way of knowing. In other words, we have natural revelation, the things of nature we can see with our eyes, we can test, we can go to the laboratory and experiment. They have natural revelation. But for answers to questions like, who are we? What does God require from us? That I need some kind of special revelation couched in human language, and there's no way to know that by testing it in the laboratory.
Okay, so something like sensory input,
Correct.
you would call that natural revelation.
Special revelation, yeah.
Well, natural. I mean, sensory would be, what you learn yourself.
Natural revelation and special revelation.
Okay. So, unrelated to that, also for Dave, Dave L., please.
Before you talk to that, I'm going to have a little rebuttal on that, because I think that the psychology of paleoanthropology is fascinating to find out how we became a reasoning human being during all the different Anthropithecus, which I'm probably bastardizing that name, through the recent one that we just found in Africa. And it's fascinating to find out the progress that hominids have made. And right now we're finding out evidence of how they thought. It's just fascinating versus God did it. Poof. Adam and Eve or whatever. It's just so much more fascinating and actually so much more majestic, because you can put your hand on it. You could feel the bones of these people that lived, find out where they were, what they were eating, how they actually buried their dead. For the first time, we have evidence of that. It's still out, by the way. It's not absolutely conclusive. But to me, it's just so much more fascinating to explore science, whether it's wrong or right, and self-correcting in the future. It's just so much more majestic than believing, poof, magic.
Bruce, you got your own proof, and that is you have non-life coming from life without RNA to help you.
I specified that already. I don't know how it happened. That's how I believe it.
That's very nice. I would call that a cop-out, frankly.
Oh, okay, plain dirty? That's
I was going to call it the stupidest thing I've heard anybody ever say.
Well, as young Earth creationists, I accept that answer, yes. I don't agree with it. Now, usually there's a line of questionnaires. Are we so boring tonight? No, it's line up. Line up behind him.
Since you guys are fighting about this origin of life, I would like to throw out a reference.
Okay.
There's a great courses out on origin of life that gives the
Excellent.
current status of the research. So I recommend that. Okay, so for Dave L., I'm curious, how would you come to knowledge if you were born in another culture and never in your life exposed to Christianity?
There's, in China, Watchman Nee had that same situation, and all God requires is an honest heart. There's a book out called Eternity in Their Hearts. Richardson wrote that book. He said that there was a group of people in Karen. It was actually in Burma called Karen. It was a large tribe, and they were calling for this white man with a black book to tell them about Yahweh, and they'd been asking for this for some time. And finally, they put a donkey. They said, got him ready, and he says, "Okay, guys, follow this donkey. He'll take you to this white man that's with a black book that's going to tell you about Yahweh." And they figured, okay, that animal's going to go to the nearest watering hole, and that'll be it. He wandered 120 miles into a mission, stopped at a well, and there was a missionary in the well. He was a linguist. He could speak their language. He said, "I can't come to you, but you bring your people to here, and I'll tell them about Yahweh." There's stories like that all over the world. Whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. He that seeks me with his whole heart will find me.
You're changing the question. The question was if you were never exposed to Christianity in your lifetime, and you just stated that in that situation you would be exposed. So,
yeah, there was a. I will be giving an example of a fellow who was never heard of it. He was taken to a statue of Buddha in China. He looked at the statue and he looked up in the sky and he said, "God, you're so great. You're to be in that rusty old statue. I want to know you." 20 years later, a missionary came and shared with him about Jesus. All God requires is an honest heart.
That's not an explanation, Dave.
That's what I'm saying. It was exactly what would happen. I would have probably gone up. I don't know what I would have done.
How do other people gain knowledge without Christianity? I think is what it's saying. Is that correct?
Well, I just gave you an example.
Yeah, I'm going to try once more, if you don't mind me restating. If
I'll
not,
answer the question of my own then.
Go ahead.
Because in some sense or in other words, I grew up in such an Aborigine background in the United States, where I found out later almost nobody I talked to had any idea what the message really was. And being as I'm principled in mathematics and science, I was able to reject all sorts of things en route. I would also point you to Socrates. If you've never read Socrates, it'd be the play would be interesting because it's supposedly based upon the life of him, where he lived within polytheism. And yet, despite the fact that he did, he believed actually only in one God, though he did give deference to several others. Yes, I've read the play, I know. And that was the true reason, according to the play, why he was put to death, too. In other words, he died for that belief.
okay, so you have also changed my question.
That's my actual...
So,
A hypothetical question cannot be answered because we don't know what we would have done.
Let me restate it one more time, and I won't belabor it. No?
The question's been answered. If you don't like the answer, that's...
Join us for dinner afterward, and we can talk as much as we want. And we do.
Okay, my question is to Dave L. and then to Bill. You were already asked this question before, but you kind of misdirected it with one passage. If God inspired the Bible, he would know that the bat is not a bird, it's a mammal. So if God inspired it, then why again did he already address the bat as a bird in 3 different passages? You addressed one passage, but there's 3 other passages where he clearly states the bat is a bird. But if God inspired it and told men to write the scripture, then why did man write the scripture and address the bat as a bird? And this goes on in other scripture where their mistakes are made. So why is God inspiring men to write mistakes in the Bible, especially biological mistakes?
We have classified the bat as a mammal. That is true.
Yes.
But if you look up in the sky and you see the bat flying around, I would
God
call it a
knows
bird
better.
too.
But God knows better, and he inspired the Bible.
If you have
to
to go to that extreme to try to find
Sure.
something wrong with the Bible,
I'm saying I don't
you
have
have
to.
a problem.
No, I don't have to. There are plenty of other mistakes.
I don't think so.
Oh, no, there are. I'm just pointing out this one stated
You have
3
a problem
times.
with your anger.
No, actually, it's not. This is a biological mistake.
Yes, I believe so, because I think that's true. I mean, you're a smart person. I'm not questioning that. But I'm just saying that sometimes when you have something, you try to find something.
I didn't have to. This one was already brought up. And I'm saying this one is pretty simple, especially for biologists. I can also bring up Genesis, where the whole
problem is
the whole thing of Genesis is wrong as to how things were made and created.
That's not true.
Oh my gosh! Do you even
That
know
is
how things are created?
absolutely not
you
true.
know what? Let's not even take that one into account. Let's just address the bat. That one's a simple one.
Well,
okay, a bat's
how
a
would you
mammal.
describe something that's flying around? I would call it a bird.
Well, of course you would. You're not a biologist. You're not God. And you're not God, for sure.
Well, I'm just saying, language of appearance.
So what? You're not God, you're not a biologist. Okay,
I think
Bill,
that's a
let's
very
have you
moot
answer
point.
it. It's moot to you because you're not a biologist, you're not God, you don't know these things.
Okay, what's the passage you're talking about?
Let's go Deuteronomy. Let's see, we have both Leviticus and Deuteronomy.
Just give me the verse.
I'm just saying Leviticus 11:19, Deuteronomy 14:18. We can talk about it later, but I'm just telling you. Biologists and God know it. So how difficult is it to say that if you've got a good percentage of people that do know it, and God, who's almighty and all-knowing, supposedly, knows this, why would he inspire a man to write down a mistake that he knows is going to be caught later when science catches up?
I wouldn't call it a mammal anyway. If it's flying around, I'd call it a bird.
You wouldn't, because you're not God and you're not a biologist.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's right.
It doesn't...
I'm going
that's
to
my
interrupt
whole
this for a
point.
second because I have a little quib bit.
That's all right.
That's okay. And if the Bible said something like, there's going to be a great source of energy in the future, it's totally unknowable now, but it equals E equals MC squared. It is that E equals MC squared anywhere, any historical, biblical, Quran, I don't care, any text, holy text at all. If they said something legitimate, come on, God, give me something I can really sink my teeth into, right? I know that a lot of the Christians think that there's no contradictions. We believe that there are contradictions. I want you to look how many contradictions are there in the Bible on the web tonight, and I want you to explore them. And if your opinion is that there are explanations for all of these and they're not taken out of context, let me hear your opinion.
The beauty that we've been able to communicate and dialogue back and forth with each other is that we don't require the other to answer the question in the way we want it to be answered. And we give respect to one another with what their beliefs are. And all I ask is that as we ask our questions, we give respect to the answers given, even if it's not the one that you want.
Okay, may I? Dave Dana-Bashian, you said nothing in the Bible contradicts modern science. How do you account for the long day of Joshua? And there's one other place in the Bible where it says the sun either goes backwards or stands still.
You were misaddressing. I believe you were addressing Mr. Lehman. I didn't cite these things.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
To address him.
Oh,
Were you addressing me, or were you addressing Dave Dana-Bashian? Or what, does it matter?
I guess I remembered it wrong. I thought Dave Dana-Bashian said it.
I'm
But,
here, but I didn't say it.
okay.
I might have, but I didn't.
Okay.
I'll let you answer.
Who said nothing in the Bible contradicts modern science?
That must have been him.
I would say that.
Okay. The long day of Joshua and sun going backwards. I don't remember where sun going backwards is. I can't find it. If somebody has a...
That's
What about the
Hezekiah.
sun lasts staying around for one day, for 24 hours in the sky? I think that might have been. So one army could one army could fight against another army, and the Jews.
Well, there Joshua was holding up. Yeah, the idea was they needed more time to win the battle, and God prolonged the day. Now he could have used another light source. He could have used a lot of different things. Language of appearance again. We don't know exactly what he did.
There's also disagreement in the camp on that, too. For what it's worth, there's also disagreement in the camp on what that would mean, too. Robert Dick Wilson mentioned that the cuneiform DM refers to something being dumb. In other words, not shining its light, because that was the last thing Joshua needed was more heat in order to defeat them. You can read about it in Wycliffe commentary under the passage in question.
Now,
Joshua
I'm going
10.
to respect that you have an opinion on that, but I'm going to vehemently disagree because every person that I've talked to has a different opinion. Remember how I said if you have different consensus of opinions, chances are it's less true than if everybody had a sense of opinion? Go ahead and look up Luke 19:27. Can everybody write that down in their heads? Luke 19:27. I'm not going to even say the verse, but I asked 5 biblical scholars about that verse, and I got 5 different answers entirely. And these guys were biblical scholars. One of them is Dave's close friend, Jim. And this is an experiment I implore you to do if you're a believer. Find out the different interpretations and discover that there is no correct interpretation of any Bible.
Question and answer time, or?
It's, well, nobody's kind of, you're the first one. Okay. I'm sorry, I do talk a little bit too much, and I wholly agree, I wholly admit it.
All right, am I up? All right, thank you for the debate. I've not been to a debate before. I'm going to try to stick to the topic of how do we know what's real. But first I'd like to say, as far as not knowing something, I consider a virtue, not a cop-out. And secondly, if I don't know something and say I do, I would say that would be non-virtuous. But let me get to my question. 33,000 denominations of Christianity alone, not including the other religions of the world. How do we get 33,000 denominations of Christianity alone if those denominations all get their interpretation of Scripture through revelation?
You want an answer to that, or are you going to ask another question?
Yeah, I'll ask the questions, and then you can answer. Yeah, it's very short. And I understand that you can know what is true and what is not true through revelation. The question is, how do you know that the information that you are receiving through divine revelation is from God, is from yourself, or is from Satan himself? That's my question. Thank you.
What was the first one? Yeah. Actually, that's one of the strengths of Christianity. Each denomination has... Dave Barton went and spoke all over America, and he found that about 5% difference in most of the denominations. In other words, there were not major differences. I know that I personally could belong to about 66 different denominations, and there probably a lot more of those comfortably not a problem. So there is very little difference in most of them.
Well, then just two.
Okay.
Two.
To what?
Let's say there are only 2 differences, 2 denominations that vastly disagree on their interpretation of revelation. Which one of those would be right, and how does each of those know that the revelation comes from God or Satan? That's the question.
Well, concerning what we call evangelical Christianity, we all believe the same thing. The salvation is a free gift of God. So that's Christianity. Other than that, it's not. If it's not biblical, it's not Christian. And there's a lot of groups that call themselves Christian that are not biblical, and so we'd have to say that at least in that portion, is not Christian. So the idea is not to see how much false doctrine we can incorporate into our belief system and still call ourselves Christians. The idea is a little leaven leavens a whole lump, so we don't want to incorporate any false doctrine in it. Just because there's a lot of different groups, there's a lot of different... there's probably 20,000 to 30,000 New Age cults in this country. There's 350 different branches of Catholicism. There's 175 branches of Islam. So they have differences.
There's a few other factors that I would throw into the mix too. One of them is that a lot of the Scripture was said to be concealed instead of revealed. This is evident in Matthew 11. Yea, for such was thy gracious will. The other is came through an experience that I had with a student 38 years ago, and he was wondering much the same sorts of things that you were. And about the only thing that came to my mind then is probably about the only thing it does, and that is the information is not said to be exhaustive. It's said to be sufficient for what we need to know, but not necessarily exhaustive, answering every single question everybody could ever hope to ask.
Just to add to that last part, It's unusual how Christians come up with a conclusion that God told them to do something that agrees with what they would do anyway.
Yeah. Point.
I would, by the way, if you had a specific question to ask about, let's say, a particular doctrine that two different groups, that would be easier to answer than just throwing out some general thing.
Well, the debate topic. Let me get here. The debate topic is how do we know what is real?
True.
And
how can we know what is true?
True. Okay. Yeah, pretty much the same. That's the.
And my answer would be do an exegetical study of what the Bible teaches, and that's what we believe.
Oh, not Revelation. Or both.
What are you talking about, Revelation?
Well,
the book of Revelation
No.
Yeah, when I say Scripture, that's what I'm talking about.
No, but I'm talking about personal revelation. My question is, I'm a poor sinner. I have to make a decision between the Mormon God, the Catholic God, and the fundamentalist God, Baptist God.
Yeah, the Baptist one is the correct one.
You each... I know. That's what the Mormons said. That's what the Mormons said about their religion. So my question is, staying to the point, you're saying you have the truth. You're saying you have the truth. They're saying they have the truth through revelation. How do I decide which one of you is telling the truth? How do I know your revelation is coming from God and not Satan? Is their revelation coming from Satan?
Yes. Ours is coming from God.
But yours is not from God.
I respect your opinion, however.
Okay, I think that 45 seconds has been exhausted. I had a question for Bruce, and I was just wondering if life ever springs up in a petri dish, won't that actually be proof of intelligent design? Because I don't think that a petri dish, a laboratory, the experiment, and all of the substances mixed in the petri dish that bring forth life will have been a chance occurrence.
It would be intelligent design if it happened spontaneously without anybody knowing. And even that wouldn't be intelligent design because all they would do is study it, how they would get it to know, and eventually it would fall back in the natural world. It's the same thing as deciding 500 years ago, wow, that rainbow looks absolutely beautiful. I'm sure God is the only thing that could do that. Well, now we know. God's proofs are becoming fewer and fewer because by the time we decide on something or experiment around and have an hypothesis and actually not decide on something, but come to a conclusion that it's natural, God's miracles have grown much fewer, especially during the last 200 years. Everything from medicine. I mean, Dave was quoting scripture, and I could quote scripture from the Quran that does the same thing. In fact, in the Quran it says the speed of light. That's a lot of juxtaposition you have to do to say that in the Quran. I don't believe one word of it because the way they come about it. It doesn't say outright the speed of light, which is one of the things that if the Bible really wanted to impress me, it could. But don't you think that, suppose that you got malaria.
Okay, let's stick with the question, which had to do with intelligent design.
No, it would not.
Okay, so you're saying petri dishes and chemicals and amino acids and all of the elements that were put together by scientists actually had no hands or intelligent design involved in them at all?
You could use the argument of ignorance. And
No. We're not talking about ignorance. We're talking about intelligence. You're saying all those things are coming together as a miscellaneous happenstance? Well, I actually asked Bruce, and I would like to hear Bruce's... you keep just distracting yourself from the subject of intelligent design means designed by intelligence.
I'll have Bill answer it after I have. How could you tell if it was intelligent design or not?
Well, if you've got a bunch of people that are intelligent designing it.
But are they designing it?
No, they're not designing. They're experimenting. Sorry, I'm gonna call that. Science is not proving something right. It's actually observing something and trying to prove it wrong. That's the whole beauty of science.
How did all those chemicals get in a dish that form RNA? They didn't happen because they put the petri dish out in the air and those
No,
chemicals,
they put the chemicals
just fell
together.
into it.
If you're talking about
So
the
they
scientist being the
designed
intelligent part of the experiment,
that would be
sure.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Well,
so if life happens in a petri
why didn't you
dish,
say scientific?
because
anytime
intelligent
anybody-
design in a petri dish requires intelligence, and that would be the scientist designing
Yes, well, I
the
would agree with you.
experiment.
In that part, if you're talking about the science being intelligent, I would totally agree with you.
Well, that makes perfect sense. So it does then, in fact, prove intelligent design as the source of life.
I think what Bruce is trying to say is that there would be an intelligent design to the experiment, but the experiment was attempting to replicate conditions that were found billions of years ago.
Which they have no idea if they actually existed or not. They're hypothesizing the conditions and specifically selecting the ones that would most produce life based on the intelligent understanding of what life is
and they could be
after
wrong.
the fact.
If life did develop, and they said this is one condition where life could develop by combining these, and we don't know if these chemicals were here during that time, but our best estimates are that these chemicals were there.
Based on
science. We know how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere.
Do we?
Yes, we do.
How?
By, many things. One thing is just 10,000 years ago, you could take, actually, you can, if you had enough money, you can go up to Alaska, drill a hole, find out 10,000 years ago the bubbles in that, and find out the chemistry of the air. And through, if you're a young Earth creationist, this does not make any sense at all, by the way. Are you a young Earth creationist?
I am a young Earth creationist.
Okay.
So the fact that
you're going to deny all the science
No.
there.
I'm going to deny the
Without
interpretation of the facts and the truths that are found. I drill a core sample of ice from a glacier in Alaska, or you name it, Antarctica, and I go down 47 feet, which supposedly was 10,000 years ago, and I now take that sample and I find so much carbon dioxide in that sample. But what I have to do is interpret the fact that that was 10,000 years ago, not 4,200 years ago, previous to the flood.
Well,
or
you
just
can
after
actually
the
count
flood.
the layers.
The layers, again,
you
must
can
be
physically-
interpreted.
You can physically see the layers. You don't have to say it's 4,200 when you count 750 layers. Or
how fast were they formed?
Annually.
By your paradigm.
There's proof of this, sir. I am not.
No, there's not proof. There are facts that are going to be interpreted by a paradigm. There isn't proof of 10,000 years ago or even 30 million years ago.
Scientists are looking for the truth, and one thing they do if they.
Are you sure they're not just looking for a new grant?
Same with tectonic movement.
Okay, my 45 seconds are over. Thank you very much.
I'll have to comment on that, though, because science is really tough when it comes to controversial subjects. Tectonic theory, for instance, where the plates are moving around a little bit, about the size of the speed of our fingernail. That was discovered by a guy who was in not a submarine, but a submarine-like device that was measuring the temperature of the Atlantic Ocean, and all of a sudden this temperature went up. Took a sonic reading of the sonogram, is that correct? A reading of the bottom and saw this big rift come up. He spent 15 years arguing his point. All of the other geologists of the world were against him, but slowly but surely they started to do their own experiments. The consensus is not 100%. It's only good enough until the next piece of evidence comes up that persuades the majority of scientists in a very small field of study. We're talking thousands and thousands of different fields of study. If they can be convinced, it's more likely true. That's my point. It's never 100%, and every scientist will say that. If they do say it's 100%, they have the wrong idea about science, or it's a slip of the tongue.
Well, I would imagine there's more than 66,000 scientists who have a different opinion. Where
did you get the 66,000 from, Debbie?
The number, what was it, 33,000 or 66,000 Christianity denominations?
44,000, but he said 30 or something on the 33,000.
Whatever number it was, there are more than that many scientists who have different opinions. So here's the deal.
I'll
It's
disagree with
after
you on that
9
one, Debbie.
o'clock, Bruce.
You're the moderator. You're not a
It's
questioner.
after 9 o'clock.
Well, are you sure?
Yes, it's after 9 o'clock. We're not going to have time to do our closings. What I would propose is that we use our wrap up for our opening of the next session and do it sooner than a full 30 days away.
That's possible. Dave and I already talked about that, and we're looking into that discussion. Personally,
have a
right now,
date?
I don't feel like it's worthwhile to do the same thing. I'm afraid that it's probably going to go in the same direction. Dave's going to have to do a lot of convincing for me to change my mind.
Well, this conversation's not over. This
Well,
topic still has much to discuss about.
this subject matter.
Subject matter.
Okay.
I think this is an excellent topic, Bruce. You chose it, and I think that it's a good topic because it does cover a question.
I'll make an agreement with you,
everybody
Dave.
wants to know the answer to that.
I'll do that if you could find 2 other debaters on your side, and if I could find 2 other debaters on my side, I will do that.
We can look around and see what we can find.
Okay.
I do have somebody.
That's my proposition. I'm sticking to it.
Sam Shimon is going to be in the area about that time. We can bring him in.
Okay.
Do you want to hear
Go ahead, Debbie.
5 minutes from each of you? You had.
We don't have a closing
15.
statement. I'm sure that everybody here would like to say maybe a minute.
Yeah, I'd like to have one.
If you have a formal closing
All
statement,
right.
let's go for it.
Each of the debaters will have a minute to wrap up.
Don't you have a lot more? You said you have 15 minutes left on the clock for yourselves.
Minute. That's 5 minutes.
Well, in that case, we usually end about 9:30. Debbie, would you think it would be okay to extend the Q&A another 10 minutes?
Well, I have to leave.
Well, I can moderate for you. Who's a neutral party here?
I am.
He can
If
moderate
we
for
wait
you.
till we don't leave at 9:30, we leave at 9 o'clock. Because if we wait till 9:30, we're not out of here till 10 o'clock, and the people that are here for the church are here a lot longer than what they anticipated being here. So I think out of respect for the facility, and by the way, I need to do a passing of the hat.
Oh, right. Please contribute.
that, because-
this rent here is not free. Well, literally it is free, but our contributions help us stay here.
So while you do your closing, I'll get the hat.
Okay. So we went first, so we're going to last. So you have your 15 minutes, right, Dave and Dave?
Yeah.
Okay.
How much time do we actually have? Bruce said 15 minutes, so that. How about 5 minutes?
No, it's only 1 minute on me. I don't think Bill or Cary is going to talk. So we will forfeit at least our 2 minutes to Dave. I think 5 minutes is fine. And then I will just do closing.
That was gracious of you. Well,
Debbie, can you start the clock, please?
it's going. 51. Okay, yeah. There were a lot of new topics I wanted to cover tonight that I hadn't really got a chance to do. I did want to talk about some of the things I had in the past before Austin Clarke, who basically came up with his book Zoogenesis in 1830, or 1930, I mean, because he had been one of the leading scientists for the Smithsonian Institute, and he found that if you're going to believe in evolution, the only way you're going to do it is with dirt and water. It's not going to happen from any cross-species generation. At least that was his opinion, that disproving the possibility that major types of plants and animals could have evolved from one another. I mean, all the organs are there. That was the same year that Richard Goldschmidt gave up because he had been bombarding fruit flies for approximately 25 years at the University of California in Berkeley and got nothing but a deformed fruit fly. So he came up with his book called Hopeful Monsters. It actually was a book that, material basis of evolution, which he showed point after point the error of the idea of, we're doing 5. the possibility of actually gradual evolution. That's the very thing that Darwin admitted. The uniformitarianism doesn't work. Gradual, small changes, and Darwin said this, if you could show that it couldn't happen in small incremental stages, my theory would totally break down. Well, that was the same thing that happened with the leading paleontologists, Colin Patterson, Stephen Jay Gould, Niles Eldridge, Stephen Stanley, all of them. These are the guys that would recognize a transitional form because that's what they were trained to do. They're paleontologists, and all of them, none of them said they said that there were no transitional forms because they had the largest fossil collections in the world. I don't care what you think, that's what they said. So that's why Stephen Gould has said basically that this whole idea of evolutionary uniformitarianism, it just simply doesn't work. He expected the entire evolutionary community to jump over to his punctuated equilibrium, which says that every 50,000 years or so there'll be billions of mutations, and all of a sudden it jumps from one kind to another kind. I heard him in one lecture he was giving, he had a little cricket thing, and he said this is how it happens. You just push it and all of a sudden it clicks. But the 50,000 mutations is what we had at Hiroshima. You know, that's something that doesn't help the organism any. So that's why there is no mechanism, and that's what his colleague Ernest Meyer said. Mutations provide the only mechanism that would cause evolution to occur at all. Yet mutations, nobody's seen a single positive mutation. Not only that, but you need 1 billion positive mutations to get a single nascent organ. And then when you study the complexity of DNA, you know, proteins are required to form DNA, yet you need DNA to form proteins. Which came first? That's what Sagan called the biological treadmill. The origin. But assume that you did have DNA, protein all together at one time. Where did you get a self-metabolizing, repairing, living cell? That's a jump in complexity that nobody's even theoretically figured out how that could happen. So membrane encased, self-reproducing, self-repairing, metabolizing living cell. There's no evidence that any stable states exist between the assumed naturalistic formation of proteins and the formation of the first living cells. You've got barriers and buffers. You've got things that would happen that if these things were not in place, you've got the immune system has to be in place. None of these things would help the animal to survive if they had to develop gradually. And that's probably one of the reasons. The ear and the eye, the complexity of the eye is so great that nobody could imagine how this could possibly happen. So you have to be, you cannot be scientific and hold to this because you have no adequate cause to produce the effect. That's all I'm saying.
One brief comment, if I could. There was the point at which I was labeling certain comments on the other side as being a cop-out. I wasn't referring to knowledge for its own sake and saying we don't know something at the present. That's a statement that any decent human being would make if he doesn't know the answer. The objection I have is to hold out for an answer that may never come and then fall back upon that provision if in fact there doesn't seem to be anything in the near future that will answer the question. So it's a falling back provision that I was objecting to, not whether or not we are earnestly seeking for whatever the truth might hold. And that's how I would answer, how can we know what is true?
Okay. Dave, you know what I imagine? I'm going to do a rebuttal and a closing at the same time. When I hear a young earth creationist talk the way you just did, I envision myself with 200 biologists that spend their entire life, 40 to 50 years or more, that totally disagrees with what you just said. And that is the actual representation of scientists that disagree with young earth creationists. You have 0.5% of scientists agreeing with young earth creationists that are in the life sciences. When I look at you, I say, you probably have a good reason. And even if I believed you, I would have to take a look at 200 scientists disagreeing with you behind you. 200 to 1. 200 to 1. In anything that I do in life, if I have a solid 200 to 1 opinion, medicine especially, cars, although that's a little bit more personal, anything, 200 to 1. How can anybody be right when 200 times of the people that spend their entire lives say, we have the evidence to back us up, where is your evidence? So let me say that I want
That's
one.
not true.
Okay, that's my opinion.
It's
a
simply
rebuttal.
not true.
It's not a discussion. It's my opinion. Look it up. Look it up yourself. Find out. If I'm wrong, if you're wrong, let the audience find out by themselves. If this is not a question and answer period, but I will be happy to talk with you.
Where do we look that up?
Talkorigins.org. What? Talkorigins.org. And they have several thousand pages on the descriptions and citations of the scientists. A consensus is what I believe is true in anything. If there was a rabbit's foot found in the Cambrian period, right on, bro. Your science better find out what's going on there, because that's leading right into creationism. Our brain is really a jumblation. I just made that word up. Jumblation of thoughts and ideas that can be changed. I see people all the time that change their minds on things. I understand now, through the process of looking at psychology on a very amateur level, that we could be wrong big time on any of our thoughts, no matter what our personal experiences might be. I find the curiosity of finding out why people think the way they do fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I understand now, after 7 years of study, why people think the way they do and why they are so wrapped up around not changing their mind. And in certain situations, I could say it's not their fault. Conservative and liberal brains think differently, and we're hardwired. Of all the atheists I talk to, how many people say, nobody talked to me when I was 8 or 10 years old. I just thought of this stuff myself. That's not nurture. That's nature. We are hardwired to be skeptical. We are hardwired to be conservative. I find that the skeptical mindset is much more fulfilling than knowing there's people out there working very hard to make explanations on the things that they observe. Definition of science. I am a science nut because I see it's the only way we can better ourselves. Religion and belief in the supernatural, whether it's psychics or Bigfoot, degrades the human condition by not advancing it. It holds it back, much like the cavemen. I just find it so much more majestic to explore the world on a natural basis. There might be an afterlife. Nobody knows. When people say, I know, I know, I know, what I really think they are saying is that I believe extremely strongly and my confidence level is at 100%, but nobody knows. It's belief. You cannot cross that agnostic line. Belief and agnosticism and Gnosticism are two different things. We are all agnostic. We are an agnostic atheist. We are an agnostic theist. Because if you really get down to the point, we believe. Knowledge is a subset of belief in a Venn diagram. If you have knowledge, you have to believe you have knowledge. Does that make sense?
No.
Maybe we should talk about belief and knowledge, and that's
Ben
all.
Stein's 2008 document.
Thank you very much. We'll see you at Norm's. Thank you, everybody, for coming.